Hey, everybody. Welcome to Odd and Untold, the podcast where we talk about all things strange and spooky. And we have a strange one this week. We're going to be going back to New Jersey. I've done a few episodes on the Jersey Devil. I will link to those in the description below. And that is probably New Jersey's most famous cryptid. But there is another cryptid that I've been wanting to talk about for a while. I first mentioned the Mantis Man in episode 120, my Halloween special. I will link to that again down below. Um, and I'll get into that story a little bit later. But when I was a kid, I had this Mantis Man in my hotel room when I was camping with my parents. We were up in the Poconos, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But I wanted to talk about the Mantis Man, which is essentially a giant praying mantis type creature. And there's a lot of debate over this, whether it's a cryptid, whether it's an alien, whether it's some sort of interdimensional being, whether it's a hoax. I'll get into all of this. But it's a weird creature. The sightings really only go back to about 2002. So there's not a heck of a lot of history here. I've tried pulling some stories from the internet, and there are some stories, not all from New Jersey, but there are sightings of this thing. And it's one of those things where even if it doesn't exist, even if it's just something in our head, like that fascinates me as a psychologist. Just why do we see certain things? Why do we see Bigfoot? Why do we see giant mantis men? So let's get into what the Mantis Man is, where it's seen, and we'll talk about some stories, and I'll give you my thoughts on what this creature may or may not be. So I'm just here on Cryptid Wiki, and it gives a brief overview of the Mantis Man. And again, there's not a lot to really get into. As they say, it's a roughly 7 foot tall bug-like creature, reported mainly in Hackettstown, New Jersey, near the Musconetcong River. And I've talked about this in previous episodes. Rebecca and I have done some mammoth marches, and the first one we did, it's a 20-mile march, 20-mile hike. You do it in 8 hours. We did it in like 10. We were a little out of shape back then. We do it a little bit more quickly now. But the first one we ever did was in Hackettstown, New Jersey. I did not see a giant 7 foot tall praying mantis, sadly, or maybe not so sadly. But it's always cool when I can sort of connect these things to places I've been, and New Jersey's not far from me. So I love the New Jersey cryptids. And we'll get into some sightings here. And again, there's not a lot of historical sightings. I found a few on Reddit, people's personal accounts, but the main two or three accounts just keep getting recycled. And I'm going to get into why there's some doubt cast upon those. So the two main sightings we're going to talk about involves two men who were fishing and saw this praying mantis man in a body of water or near a body of water. And the interesting thing is that praying mantises don't usually spend their time in water. They're on leaves, they're on tree branches. I've seen praying mantises in Brooklyn. You know, when I was a kid, they would just kind of fly and land on a bush, and like, oh my God, there's a praying mantis, and we'd pick it up and let it crawl on us. Very cool. But they're not typically seen near water, so that does make this a little interesting. So let's get into the main stories here. So this story comes from a Mr. Strickler, which and I think here's where we're going to get into some weird overlap and some weird chicken versus egg origins of this. Ron Strickler runs Phantoms and Monsters, which is a very popular website about cryptids and ghosts and aliens and all sorts of things. And a lot of these stories originated on his website. But then you have this story from a Mr. Strickler. So is it his story that he's telling? Is it another Mr. Strickler with the same last name? Is this somebody who's just confused because they pulled it from the Phantoms and Monsters website? I'm not sure, but we'll get into this first story. And this witness says, I saw something strange a few weeks ago on the Musconetcong River near my home in Hackettstown, New Jersey. I was driving home from the drugstore on Newburgh Road. As I drove near the bridge over the river, I noticed to my left something, I thought it was a fisherman, standing in the river just off the south bank. I slowed the car and looked closer. It wasn't a person, and it was transparent-like with a weird shape. It moved slowly towards the bank and into the trees. I drove further so I could see it coming out of the trees. That's the last I saw of it. It was 8 feet tall or so and had long, thin arms hanging off of it. The color was a pale brown, but I could see through it. The head was small compared to the body. It was a sunny day, so I thought it may be glare from the water, but after I thought back, I realized I wasn't seeing a mirage or glare. I checked the internet and didn't see anything about it. I mentioned it to a coworker in my office at lunch on Wednesday. He gave me the strangest look. I thought, uh-oh, he thinks I'm nuts. We went back to his computer and he brought up the Hackettstown forum with the Mantis Man witness. And we'll get into that because that is on Phantoms and Monsters. This one, I don't know why he thinks this is a Mantis Man. He's saying it was almost transparent. It was a weird shape, tall and long, thin arms, pale brown, but he could also see through it. So not sure how this got connected to Mantis Man. But let's get into the Phantoms and Monsters aspect of this. So I'm pulling this one off Reddit, but as you can see below, this is from the Phantoms and Monsters website. And the story is titled Translucent Mantis Man Sighted on the Musconetcong River in 2006. Mantis Man, humanoid, tall, 6 foot at least, but he sensed 6.5 to 7 foot. Triangular head, huge slanted black eyes, just like a praying mantis. Its whole body was gangly, knobby, but you could still sense it was powerful. And no, I would not say it was a big bug. It was definitely humanoid, despite the mantis insect qualities. When I saw the Mantis Man, I was about 15 to 20 yards away. It was moving away from me back up the riverbank. I am chest high in the river. The first thing I see was this grasshopper thigh, but bending forward like a human. Then the whole form. He's looking at me over his shoulder, moving up the bank, astonished, amazed. What? That I am in the water in a strong current, that I can see him? But yes, we lock eyes and this creature is astonished. I get the sense that he can't believe I am in the water, that he can't believe I have seen him, that I am not perturbed at all, something of all three. I still don't know, just astonishment, and he's actually trying to get away from me and the water. So understand that this was several feet above me. I looked up at it and framed clearly against that blank white sky. Like a full ghost apparition, it was indeed clear, but nevertheless nearly transparent and fading fast. Then it evaporated mid-stride. Again, I stressed the strong impression that the Mantis Man was cloaked, and I caught it just right. It abruptly found itself against a new blank background and was adjusting quickly. No, I do not believe it slipped into another dimension or plane. I detected movement and first saw that strong left thigh and strong right calf, then the whole thing, and immediately those eyes/face. The whole encounter was only a couple of seconds. I cannot tell you with any strong certainty what its feet or hands looked like. I wasn't looking there, but I can tell you that its arms were normal, quote unquote, and not the literal mantis forelegs I have recently seen in inaccurate descriptions of the creature. So this is interesting. Again, if you think about it, if you weren't thinking Mantis Man and you said a big triangular head, huge slanted black eyes, most people are going to think gray alien. That's just the typical gray alien description, the big black eyes, the triangular sort of head. And that's what most people are going to think. But this thing, he's saying at least 6 foot tall, but probably closer to 6.5 or 7. And that's not really what we see with the gray alien, the typical gray alien description. Those are usually like 4 feet tall, 4.5 feet tall. They're usually small, child sized. So this is something taller. There's this cloaking aspect to it. And a lot of people have seen these things in the woods. They say it looks like it's cloaking, almost like the Predator. Like once the Predator movie came out, the very first one, and the Predator would cloak itself in the woods, and you just kind of see this shimmering form moving against the trees, and you kind of had to look at it just right, and it had to be moving, otherwise you wouldn't really see it. Almost like this cloak. So really weird, and we do hear this a lot, that the thing is cloaking, and that's what he's saying here, that he doesn't think it's going into another dimension. It's finding a different background and then trying to blend into that background, like trying to cloak itself, trying to camouflage itself. So very strange. It doesn't sound like anything known to man. This is not like Bigfoot where you can say, oh, you just saw a bear. He didn't see a bear. Could he be hallucinating? Possibly. I just don't know. Again, there's not a long, lengthy history of reports like this where you see with Bigfoot. Like Bigfoot, you can trace that back hundreds and hundreds of years, if not thousands, to, indigenous people and colonists and things like that. Whereas with this, you don't really have that, but you do have people seeing these types of creatures. and very strange. It's not fully a mantis man, and he's saying like you see these depictions on the internet, and it's basically just a tall praying mantis, and it's it's got the mantis forearms. This is not really what he's seeing, but the small triangular head with the big black eyes, it's evoking that sort of praying mantis head or that gray alien head. So interesting. I don't know what to make of this. You guys want to leave a comment down below? Again, I question everything. I'm throwing out different theories there. I'm not saying this witness is lying or whatever. Again, maybe he was hallucinating. Maybe it was just a trick of the reflection on the water or the sky, or who knows. But a weird sighting regardless. Okay, so here I am back at the Phantoms and Monsters website, Lon Strickler's site, the Musconetcong River Mantis Man Returns. And he says, in July 2011, I received correspondence from a witness in New Jersey who described an amazing encounter with a praying mantis humanoid while fishing on the Musconetcong River. The information was so convincing that I included it in my recent book. Last night, I came across the following post in the Hackettstown Life online forum. This is the original entry. The link does not work anymore. I tried it earlier. So this post is no longer there, and we're going to get into some of the controversy here in a bit. But let me just talk about this. So this story says, Mantis Man sighting on the Musconetcong. This is no joke. I like a good story like anyone else, but my friend told me a story today that was so profound that I felt the need to share it with the rest of the town. This friend of mine who told me this story is a very successful businessman. Deep into our conversation today, he started tearing up uncontrollably and told me he had something to get off his chest that had been eating at him for some time. I hope you're ready for this because I wasn't. Apparently, about a year ago, my friend and his brother were down at Stevens State Park fishing right around dusk. During this time, while his brother was roughly 50 yards downstream fishing, he said he felt a strange vibration in his right ear, and from that, he turned and looked to the right. When he turned and looked to the right, he said he saw this 6 to 7 foot praying mantis looking man, just standing there and unable to believe that he could see him. He said the creature was black and gray, and to be quite honest, the way my buddy was telling the story, I was having a tough time. I know he saw this thing because I could see it in his face. Anyhow, we Googled praying mantis man on Musconetcong right after that, and it turns out my friend is not alone. I can't even emphasize enough how bad my friend was crying today over what he saw. So there's further clarification here. But again, this is a secondhand story. This is one man telling a story that his friend told him. So really interesting. But there's this sort of subtext to the whole Phantoms and Monsters thing. And when you get into clicking on these links and they don't lead anywhere, skeptics will poke holes in this and they'll say, all these stories are kind of coming from Phantoms and Monsters and we're not seeing these anywhere else. And the original links to these stories are gone. There's no way to really track this down. And the witness has to remain anonymous, so they're not giving names. The original post is gone. So how do we verify this? When there's only one source and the one source will not divulge names, will not divulge sources from where they got their story, tongue-tied here, it does create a credibility issue. And I'm not saying I agree with that, that Lon is lying about this or making this up, but I can sort of see where the skeptics will come in here and say, this is one website. Is this being fabricated for clicks? And I don't know the answer to that. I know personally, I get stories from people. I get emails. They will tell me their stories. They saw Bigfoot. They saw a UFO. They saw a lake monster. And they will tell me, I'm sharing this, but please do not tell anybody. And I don't. And I've had other stories where people are saying, hey, you can share this, but please change my name. Please change the names of everybody in the story. Maybe change the location a little bit. And I do that because I'm trying to protect their privacy. And it's a fine line to walk because you want to protect people. You want them to feel safe coming forward and telling the story so that that information gets out there. But at the same time of that double-edged sword, you can't have independent verification of that. Because if someone comes to me and says, well, tell me who told you that story, I can't. I've, promised this person I would not divulge their information. And Lon Strickler and other researchers are kind of in that same boat where they can share this stuff, but it's very hard for them to verify it. And I can't verify any of the stories I'm telling you. All I can say is I got an email and this is the story, and I've changed certain details to protect people's privacy, and that's the best we can do. So yeah, you have these stories originating from phantoms and monsters. Was it created by Lon Strickler? I don't know. I'm not going to get into that paranormal drama. I think they're cool stories, and I think we're going to get to some other stories that will back these up, and my own experience. So interesting stuff to be sure. Controversial as well, because does this fit into a cryptid? I don't think so. Bigfoot definitely does. If it exists, it's probably just an undiscovered primate. So cryptid, an animal that is just not known to us yet. A giant praying mantis man doesn't seem to fit into the natural order of things. So now we're talking, is it an alien? Is it a hallucination? Is it some weird cultural phenomenon? I don't know. But we're going to get into some more stories. So let's move forward with that. So as I said, a lot of these reports, they all kind of originate with phantoms and monsters, which if you look at solely those stories, it kind of calls the credibility into question, because it's, why is that the only place where these things are being reported? And it's not. So I found a couple of other stories I'm going to get into. So this one is on Reddit, in the subreddit Cryptozoology, in a post about the Mantis Man. And user Murphaniel 10 days ago says, "This is going to sound weird. I'm 30 years old, born in New Jersey. Haven't lived there in years, but that's where I was born. When I was about 6 or 7 years old, I vividly remember something that I saw very briefly, then it disappeared when I looked away to tell my parents. This is what I saw, and mind you, whatever it was kind of pushed me in the direction in which I've discovered this random ass post about New Jersey Mantis Man, because now I'm trying to figure out what I saw now that I'm more aware of the existence of other beings via research." So it sounds like he saw this thing when he was a kid, and now that he's a little older and kind of maybe getting into cryptids or the paranormal, he's researching it and then found this and like, oh. So interesting. He continues. "Long story short, we pull up in the driveway and I'm getting ready to go into the house. It's broad daylight outside. In front of the house is a lawn. As I get ready to walk up the lawn, I see this big ass green bug looking thing, like human size or maybe taller. I don't know. I was 7. I just knew it was huge. It stopped me in my tracks and I did not continue moving forward. It was light green and thin, and I don't know how else to explain it, but it looked like it was very light, like a breeze would just blow it away, like a piece of paper. I turned around to tell my parents to look, but they were not paying me any attention at all, and when I looked back at the lawn, it was gone. Mind you, I was just a little black boy in New Jersey. Only reason I know it looked like a praying mantis is because I learned later on, like years later in school, what a praying mantis was. But at that time, I never saw, never heard of, no damn praying mantis before. The first thing that popped up in my mind at the time when I saw it was Skyther from Pokemon. I'll try to put a picture up of that here so you guys can see what that looks like, because I have no idea. I did not know what Skyther looked like, because that's the only thing I knew it looked like. To this day, it's still a very vivid memory. So this is interesting too, because you have this young boy who's probably not thinking of cryptids. It's not on his mind. He didn't even know what a praying mantis looked like, but he sees this giant bug looking thing, human size or taller. He was only 7, so he's not saying how big it was, but a 7-year-old knows basically what an adult size is versus what other kids his size would be. Light green, thin, looked very light. So it does almost like a giant praying mantis. Really interesting. And I had my experience when I was a kid, probably a little older than him, maybe 8 or 9. And as I mentioned earlier, my family, we were up in the Poconos. It was like a summer trip, and we were near like a lake, a very small lake, and we had these cabins. And the parents, the adults, put all the kids to bed because they wanted to sit outside at the fire and drink and talk and not have the kids around. And I was sharing a bedroom with my younger brother. So it was the two of us in the room. And again, it's a weird memory. It's very vivid. I don't remember a lot of other sort of peripheral stuff. I just remember we were in bed. My brother was sleeping. I've always had trouble falling asleep. Not so much these days now that I'm a little older, but growing up, I mean, up until about 5 years ago, so the first 45 years or so of my life, me falling asleep was always tough, especially in a strange place. Like I'd be up for like 2 hours just trying to settle myself down and get comfortable and get to sleep. So my brother was passed out. I was wide awake. And I just have this memory of this humanoid thing in my room, and it was tall and it looked like a giant praying mantis. or an alien, but it was tall. It wasn't like the 4 foot tall uh, gray aliens. It was a little bit taller. And again, I was young. I'm not saying this was an actual experience or this was just something in my mind. And as a psychologist, I'm always looking in that direction as well. Is this a DNA memory? Is this a shared cultural experience? Is this just something psychologically that our brains trigger, just like our like instinctual fear of snakes? Little children who don't even know what snakes are will get kind of creeped out by snakes and spiders. Like there's just this instinctual thing in us to be afraid of certain things. Is this why we see Bigfoot in the woods? I don't know. I'm just throwing theories out there. I tend to believe Bigfoot exists, me personally. And if you don't, that's great. If you think Bigfoot's from portals, that's fine too. We all have our different beliefs and perceptions and points of view. This thing, I don't know what it was. I just know I saw it. I know to this day, it's very vivid in my mind, in my memory, that this thing was in my room, just standing there staring at me. And like I said, I don't remember what happened before. I don't remember what happened after. I may have told my parents. I don't even know if they would remember this. They're probably just, it's a kid having a nightmare. He's in a weird place. He's outside all day. There's bugs and mosquitoes and all sorts of creepy crawly things up in the woods, for a city boy. So I don't know. I don't know what it was, but I've seen this thing. And is it like the Hat Man, where it's just people all over the world are going to see this thing and in their dreams or during sleep paralysis? Or I don't know, but some of these people are seeing this in broad daylight. And all I know is I was awake because, again, I had trouble sleeping for most of my life. I had trouble falling asleep quickly and saw this thing. So really weird. And so this story is cool too, because again, I think this is a guy who just was not into cryptids or paranormal things. He didn't know what a praying mantis even looked like until years later. And then he saw it and he's like, oh man, that's like what I saw, but bigger. So very cool story. So let's get on to some more stories. So here's another personal account I found on Reddit. The subreddit is Cryptids. And this is from a user called Divinity. And he says, Leshy or praying mantis subspecies. And I've looked into some of his subsequent comments. He's in Auckland. So he says, so I was walking out in the forest late at night to smoke a joint with a mate, and out of the corner of my eye, I spot what my mind assumes to be a moving tree. So almost like a big stick bug. I passed it off as paranoia, and that paranoia slowly built up the more I could hear the wood of the trees creaking and snapping, which was progressively getting more and more intense, as if the trees were saying, we're in territory we shouldn't be in. Even my mate was getting nervous, but eventually the anxiety eased off and we felt chill again. For the next few hours, we sat inside a dip in the forest in the center of it. We were talking about something where all of a sudden we both hear a loud wooden crunch right above us. We immediately spin our heads to the sound, only to see a creature I could best describe as looking like a praying mantis with a tree-like exoskeleton. The moment we saw the creature, we both got up and ran as fast as we could, almost immediately splitting up as we went into fight or flight mode. I ran into thorn bushes, through branches, nothing was getting in my way, until I caught a rock wrong and tripped, and I landed on twigs and sticks that jabbed into my ribs. But when I looked behind me, I noticed there was nothing there. I stopped doing anything just to listen, but to see if the creature was around. I couldn't tell if it was near, and that frightened me more. All I could hear was cracking and creaking from trees, all sounding uncanny in comparison to the creature. I felt as if the only thing that could keep me alive was sheer luck, so I said fuck it and chose a direction to sprint, and without stopping, I managed to clear about 2 kilometers before I violently threw up into a pond I stopped at, which was cloaked beneath a tree, where after making a bunch of noise, expelling my insides, I stopped and listened again for a good 15 minutes. I ended up hearing my mate calling my name a couple of times, and eventually spotted him on the top of a hill covered in large boulders. We regrouped and both made sure with each other we're not crazy and we saw the same thing, and we both confirmed what we saw. I've tried my hardest to find a creature that compares to what I saw that night, and after research, I've come across the assumption that what I saw wasn't an insect, but an actual living tree, like a leshy. I'm thinking that thing was watching us the whole time, disguised as tree branches above the woods, waiting for the opportune moment to catch us. Either way, I'm never going to ask for an adventure like that again. So this one, we have a couple of issues here. They're smoking marijuana, so there's drugs involved. And skeptics are always going to harp on that. And, you're on drugs, so you're hallucinating and you're seeing all these things. And smoking a joint it could make you a little paranoid. It could, if you're in the woods and you're hearing creepy sounds, you might get a little spooked. I don't think two people are going to run to the point where they're running through thorn bushes, falling down, twisting ankles on rocks, both seeing the same thing. And they're seeing a very detailed thing, a praying mantis creature that almost like covered in bark. So I'm not sure what to make of this one. He's saying maybe like a living tree or a giant praying mantis creature. His friend said he saw it as well. There are certain drugs that will make you hallucinate some crazy things, but marijuana is not really one of them. Again, it can make you a little paranoid. It can make you a little jumpy. I don't think you're going to see a giant praying mantis creature and then run through the forest, putting your own health and safety in danger, getting cuts and bruises and falling down. Weird. I'm not saying this guy saw a praying mantis creature. I'm just saying I don't know if a joint would do that, one or two joints, but it could. So I just wanted to read that because this is where critical thinking has to come in. And I'm not saying this guy didn't see what he saw, but I think the skeptic in me is going to say there's drugs involved. Whether it's true or not, we kind of have to throw it out. I don't think we can really consider this as an evidentiary story in the the case we're making for praying mantis man creatures. It's interesting. It's something to consider, but it's got to be like very low on the list of consideration, if not thrown out completely, because you do have the drug use. Again, I don't think having a couple of beers or smoking a joint or two is going to make you see Bigfoot or make you see aliens or make you see a praying mantis man, but it's possible. And again, maybe he was doing other stuff and he's just not mentioning that because, yeah, I did a joint and also, a ton of mushrooms or dropped a whole bunch of acid. I don't know. But I think when you have drugs involved, you have to just not consider it or just not consider it as strongly. So let us move on. Okay, so I have a couple more stories for you guys tonight. This comes from the subreddit Mantis Encounters, and I'm going to link to all these things down in the description so you guys can find them. You can do your own research. I'm clearly not going to read every story. I'm trying to pick the best ones, some to illustrate why we got to throw them out, some to illustrate why we should take them seriously. So this one comes to us from Chicago, Illinois in August of 1999, so not New Jersey. So this story says, a man who was visiting a friend's house and sleeping on the sofa in the bedroom suddenly woke up feeling very panicky and totally unable to move. Looking towards the front door, he saw a huge humanoid figure over 7 foot tall standing by the door. The figure resembled a large, quote unquote, praying mantis and was wearing something resembling a black and purple cloak. Its skin was dark gray in color. It slowly approached the witness and reached out to him with a large hand with long, thin fingers and grabbed his shoulder. At this point, the witness lost consciousness and does not recall anything else of the incident. He remembered also feeling very cold during the encounter. So here we have, again, a very tall, over 7 foot tall humanoid figure, resembled a praying mantis, but had thin fingers, like almost like human hands. It doesn't say like the long claws that a praying mantis would have. Loses consciousness, doesn't remember anything after that. So not sure what to make of this one. Could it have been a dream? He was dreaming. He suddenly woke up feeling panicked and sees this thing. Sounds very much like almost like a Hat Man encounter, but just seeing a praying mantis instead of a Hat Man. And again, I tend to really question things that happen when we're sleeping. There's too much chance of a waking dream or sleep paralysis or some sort of hallucination where we're kind of in that in between state where we're not quite sleeping anymore, but we haven't quite stopped dreaming. And those dreams can seem very real while we're awake. I've had a number of experiences where I woke up and saw something or heard something, and I don't talk about them. I don't really even mention them on the show because to me, I have to throw them out. And that's just me. I like hearing these stories because maybe there is something to it. But again, I think stories like this have to be lower on the priority list. They have to be lower on how legitimately we accept them, because sleep can mess with our minds. People sleepwalk, people have sleep paralysis. These things aren't inherently paranormal. Do people sometimes have paranormal experiences when they first wake up or right before they're falling asleep? Of course. I've been on the verge of falling asleep and I've heard something call out my name. So I will talk about some of this stuff. Just Jason. And I wake up and I'm like, holy crap, who said that? But I'm kind of on that, border of sleep and wakefulness. And I have to chalk that up to just my brain falling into that dream state. And I heard my name, but I could swear I heard it, like that it was real, that it wasn't a dream. So psychologically, we have to just really use our critical thinking and say, was this possibly a dream? And if it was, it has to get shelved. It can't really be a quote unquote a really good story. It can't really be a credible story. Not saying that the person's lying, not saying that the person didn't experience this, but was it an actual experience or was it their mind playing tricks? So just food for thought. Okay, so the last story I'm going to talk about tonight, again, there's other stories here. They get a little bit into the alien realm. They get a little bit into, it starts getting, hypnosis regression and people seeing things. And I don't like the hypnosis regression. I think there's too much of an opportunity for the power of suggestion. The hypnotist can say, oh, did you see a giant praying mantis? Oh, yes, I saw it. You're sort of leading the subject. And I don't like the hypnosis. Again, there's a time and a place for it. There's a usefulness to it, but I don't really want to focus on those stories. So I'm going to talk about this one. This comes to us from Brandy Nixon 8371. She says, my mantis experience happened when the lockdown started. I was at my daughter's father's house and we were outside and I felt something crawling on my arm. It was a baby. It was so small and adorable. I was braiding my son's hair and it stayed on my arm the whole time. And about 30 minutes later, I couldn't get it to crawl off, so I had to pick it up and sit it down. I felt so connected to that little baby. I felt so much love and trust from it. Well, the next day, I was driving over a little bridge by my house and just happened to catch out of the corner of my eye a mantis that had to be 8 feet tall standing on the side of the road in the tall grass. We made eye contact. I'm not ashamed to say that it freaked me out. The more time I had to process what I saw, the better I felt about it. But at first, I thought I was going to crap my pants. I've read they are very spiritual and peaceful beings. I just thought it was strange how the day before I saw the smallest one I've ever seen, and the next day, one that was taller than me, LOL. So she's talking about a little baby praying mantis. She had this on her arm. And then the next day, she sees a mantis man that had to be 8 feet tall standing on the side of the road. She makes eye contact with it, which we heard in earlier stories where the fisherman made eye contact with this thing as it's running up the bank. So weird stuff. And this is a daytime sighting. She's not sleeping. This is not in the middle of, sleep paralysis or sleepwalking or a waking dream. So again, a skeptic can say, well, she had praying mantises on the mind because one was crawling on her arm and she had to pick it off. And like I said, when I was a kid, we occasionally, not too often, maybe 2 or 3 times, we came across praying mantises in Brooklyn. They would just land on a bush and we'd let them crawl in our arms, and very cool, gentle creatures. They look freaky as hell, but they're essentially harmless. They're big most of the time. She's saying a little baby one on her arm. And then she sees one the next day that's like 8 feet tall. So a skeptic is going to say she had praying mantis on her mind. So she sees something she can't explain and her brain just fills it in. And it was probably, an owl or swamp gas or the moon or Venus, like whatever the skeptics want to say these things are. I don't know, but to me, this is an interesting sighting because it's during the day. She's driving, driving over a little bridge to their house, and out of the corner of her eye, she sees this tall mantis creature and made eye contact with it. So she's saying this thing was looking at her. So it's not a fleeting glimpse. It's not a hallucination. It's not a partial dream that's intruding on her waking mind. Really interesting. So not sure what to make of all these. So what is the Mantis Man? I honestly don't know. Again, I've seen it in a very sort of dreamlike state. Again, I was awake. I was very young, so the memory is hazy. Because like I said, I was only maybe 8, maybe 9. Young, I was very young and don't remember anything else after that. Other people are seeing this thing in broad daylight. Again, the sleeping story, the drug story, I tend not to give those as much credence as the other stories just because they're very easy to poke holes in and say, you were probably dreaming, you're probably just on too many drugs and hallucinating and you guys scared yourselves. But these ones that are seen in broad daylight, where there's other witnesses, harder to throw those out, harder to discredit those. I don't think it's a cryptid. It gets labeled as a cryptid, and one of New Jersey's cryptids. It doesn't sound like a cryptid. We're not really going back too far in time. We can maybe the 90s. Um, for me, the 80s. I don't know. Is it an alien? Is it an interdimensional being? Is it a cryptid? Is it just a hoax? Was this all created for the internet? I don't know. I don't know. And I'm sure people are going to have their opinions, and everyone has their stance and their point of view, but we just don't know. And I think it's easy to take shots at Lon Strickler and Phantoms and Monsters and say, oh, he made the whole thing up. He's just trying to get clicks. I can't say that that's true. I can't say that that's untrue. I don't know. All I know is that as a researcher, as someone who was a ghost hunter, as someone who ran his own paranormal group, who ran a blog, who now runs a podcast and gets emails and hears stories from people who are very sincere, and they just ask, please don't share my name, please don't share details, or please don't tell my story at all. I just wanted to tell you. I needed to get it off my chest. I just wanted to tell somebody. Yes, I understand it does ruin some credibility a little bit, or hurt the credibility a little bit, that we can't verify this. I can't share this with anybody else. And Lon can't share this with anybody else. And other researchers can't always share their research because they need to protect people's privacy. But skeptics are going to come in and say, well, if I can't verify it, it never happened. And that's kind of where we're at in the paranormal world and the cryptid world. It sucks, kind of between a rock and a hard place, but that's what we have to do. And I always appreciate people who are willing to come forward and give their names and give details and say, yeah, I'll talk to anybody. I'll talk to any skeptic. I'll talk to any researcher who wants to interview me, and I'll share my story. That's always great. And that's not an aspersion on people who want to remain confidential and private. We all have, our lives to protect. We all have our privacy to protect. And those who want to protect it, that's on them, and that's fine. And people who want to come forward, that's on them, and that's fine. So no judgments. But I do want to hear what you guys think. So leave me a comment below. What do you think the Mantis Man is? Do you think this was a hoax? Do you think it's a cryptid? Is it an alien? Is it a dream? Is it like the Hat Man? Who knows? I just thought it was a cool thing to talk about. It's not something that gets a lot of notoriety. The Jersey Devil, everybody talks about the Jersey Devil, but nobody talks about the New Jersey Mantis Man, which has been seen other places as well. If you guys have a story or a local legend you want to share, Jason at oddanuntold.com. Like I said, I will keep your information confidential. If you want me to share the story, I can read it like this and change your name and all your details. If you want to come on the show, I'm happy to have you on and talk to you and share your experiences. But if you just want me to explore a local legend, I can do an episode like this, and just let me know, because I'm very good at finding local stuff to me, but other places, it's a big world out there, so I can't always find them. So if you have suggestions, please let me know. In the meantime, everybody, question everything. Again, if someone is doing drugs and they're seeing weird things, did they really see what they think they saw? Same thing with alcohol. Same thing if they're dreaming. It doesn't mean the person's lying. It doesn't mean we're bad mouthing the person. It's just, we have to ask that question. Could you have been dreaming? Could you have been hallucinating because you were smoking joints? Were you doing any more drugs? There always need to be other follow-up questions. So question everything, everybody. Embrace the weird. I love being weird. And so we got to embrace the weird. And you don't really get much weirder than a 7-foot tall mantis man. So embrace it, everybody. Till next week, rock and roll. We'll see you then.